Is unemployment really at 23%? Should we be more concerned about the slow slide into fascism than socialism? And there is a banking crisis coming in the future. The big question is whether it will be bailouts where you have to pay through it through future taxation, or will it be bail-ins where you pay for it right now as the banks take some of your deposits? Getting right into it here. Gold and silver, the gold price was up over $1,740 an ounce. Now remember, the previous high was $1,900. So we're only like $160 away, which is about 8% or so away from an all-time high. Now, if you combine an all-time high in gold, where gold and silver are in the news every day, along with the news of the pandemic, the deficit spending, unemployment, that is like a race announcer saying, "And they're off." Because, it is off to the races with gold and silver if that happens. But look at some of these stories. Unemployment rate of 23%, question mark. This is worth a read. Fed cut back on helicopter currency. And right after that, it says, Fitch warns of record loan defaults in April as economy implodes. Well, guess what? This cutback, this is only a little pit stop and then they're going to get back into the race, because this is what will cause the next great banking crisis. Yes, there's a bunch of loan defaults happening right now. You've got stores that have been forcibly closed by governments all over, and they can't pay their rent. And if they can't pay their rent, then the landlord can't pay the mortgage, and there's a default. Malls are all closed. Imagine the loss of revenue there. Some of the stores have tried to pay their rent, but there's a clause in most of the contracts, the leases for the smaller businesses that aren't big brand names. They want to be situated somewhere near one of the big brand names that is a draw. They are buying foot traffic when they lease a spot in a mall. And so they can get out of their lease if that mall loses one of the big department stores or something that is the brand name draw. And so as these malls, they're shuttered now, and as they lose all of their clients, I'm expecting these malls to look like ghost towns with tumbleweeds blowing through them. Won't actually be like that, but they're closed now. They're probably permanently closed. Who knows? But I know that there's a banking crisis coming, and what I think is going to happen, it's going to be a combination of bailout and bail-in. And what I have done, I'm not recommending this, and I'm not saying that a bail-in is going to happen. I'm just insuring myself against tail risks by taking some of my deposits and moving them out of checking accounts and moving some over to a brokerage account and making some investments here. I make investments, and moving stuff in. I keep on purchasing real physical gold and silver, and so I'm getting ready for that by not having too much in deposits in checking accounts. But the story that I really want to get into is Mnuchin asks for equity stake in exchange for $17 billion in aid. From Bloomberg, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin will require public companies deemed critical to national security that seek a share of the $17 billion in virus-related relief to offer an equity stake to the government. An equity stake means ownership, partial ownership of those corporations. Now, if you take a look at the definitions of fascism here, they include, it's a part of fascism is a merger of business and government. And right here, it's regimenting all industry, commerce, etc. And so that means that the government regulates and authorizes everything. Businesses have to go hat in hand and ask for permission to do this or do that. And then the government will also direct businesses to do that. They remain mostly privately run and privately owned, but with the government regulating them to death and forcing them to do certain things. So that's part of the definition. Another definition that had something in it that was interesting was a belief in natural social hierarchy and the rule of the elites. So the elites they have this entitlement to run things. They're sort of born leaders, I guess, and we should be subject to them. So rule of the elites. Now, I don't know if he's one of them. He might be a nice guy. I don't know him. I don't know much about him, actually. But I do know that this is a scary road to go down when the government is actually acquiring an ownership stake in businesses. And I hate to see this happening. I want to welcome the 2,048 new subscribers. And if you subscribed recently, go back and hit that notification bell. And we sure do appreciate it when anybody gives us a thumbs up on our videos. It really does help move things along. The chart of the day. This is from somebody I consider a friend, a colleague, and he is just one class act, Grant Williams. If you haven't read any of his stuff, you should. He's an excellent analyst, and his videos are sometimes just extraordinary. Hey, Jay, now can we call it QE? And I want to point out here that, this is the Fed's balance sheet. So this is the asset side of their balance sheet. If you look at a balance sheet in total, it's always at zero. Assets minus liabilities have to equal zero. Assets minus liabilities plus paid in capital, the amount that the big banks had to pay in to buy the stock in the Federal Reserve. Yes, the big banks own stock in the Federal Reserve. If you're a member bank, you own some stock. This peaked at 4.2 trillion here, and it went down to 3.76 trillion. And that was, and then in September of last year, 7 months ago, is actually when the crisis started. And they had to stop quantitative tightening and start doing a little bit of easing up again. And so the crisis started then, and it started getting much worse later. And we're in, the coronavirus stuff. That's this part. The pandemic is here. This was destined to happen, but we've gone from 3.76 to 6.57 trillion in this short period of time. That is a 75% increase, roughly, in the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. Now, the way that this balance sheet happens, remember, this is the assets side. How do they acquire assets? They counterfeit currency into existence. They just type it, and they buy something, and now that currency is in circulation because the entity that they bought something from, the treasury bond or the mortgage-backed security or whatever it was, now has that currency. So now it's in circulation. And so this is just morally reprehensible. These people should be in jail. I'm sorry, but I just think counterfeiting currency and buying stuff is morally reprehensible, it's fraud, and it's theft. So I want to remind everybody, I'm getting into viewer feedback, but first, if you use the search bar up at the top, you're searching all of YouTube, and you're going to get the results of everything that's out there. If you have a question that you want answered by me, I most likely have answered it in detail, much more detail than I can go into here in these videos. And so if you use this little spyglass here that's available when you're either on home or videos, I think available on playlists also, just use that. Type in any term you want, you'll get all the related videos. Moving on to the viewer responses. This is from the video before last, and J.A., who I think is probably from Australia, can't wait to see the Australian housing bubble video. I've learned more in the last week and a half about how the economy works than I ever knew. Thank you. No, thank you, Jay. Thank you, J.A. Thank you for joining. I suppose you subscribe to the channel. I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank everybody that's getting as much knowledge as they can to get prepared for what's coming, because, seeing the future, this is the taking a good guess at what's going to happen. That is so important. And so for that housing video, this is the Australian real estate bubble special report that's coming out. And we did a poll to see when to release this, and overwhelmingly it was Saturday morning. So we are going to be releasing this at 7 a.m. Eastern, Saturday, 9 p.m. in Australia. The reason for such an early launch here is so that we can catch some of the people in Australia that are most interested in this. And we really would appreciate anybody that can to. These are very expensive. They take more time to produce and effort. And we have to get a lot of views to be able to continue doing those. If they're not successful, if this doesn't get a lot of views, then we just can't do more of them. We've got this one, and we've got one on the 1929 stock market crash, which has lessons in it that are applying today. This one has lessons for everybody. Australia is the most extreme example, so that's the reason I wrapped this around Australia. But believe me, the real estate crash is coming to your neighborhood soon, because the world's central banks have pumped every economy back into real estate bubbles. So if you can be there, if you can go to our website, subscribe to the newsletter, you'll get a link to this video, and you can go and be there when it originally airs, and that really helps launch this thing and get a really good view curve for us, and that will make it worthwhile for doing more of these in the future. The economy in crisis, Jim Stegall, as a relative of the Stegall from the Glass-Steagall Act, I believe it should be reenacted once again to prevent banksters from gambling with people's deposits. Clinton should have never repealed the law, and I couldn't agree more, Jim. You know, I started going down a road where I said Citigroup was evil for doing this, and about a year before this was repealed, Citigroup, it used to be Citibank, and they merged with Travelers Group, which contained Solomon Smith Barney, and Shearson Lehman was in there. And so it was all this brokerage banking, this investment banking that was merged with commercial banking, all of the individual retail depositors. And that was what Glass-Steagall was created to prevent. It separated commercial banking from investment banking. But the rules have been interpreted more and more laxly throughout the years, and the Federal Reserve basically said, well, maybe you can get away with it. And then Citigroup now, because it changed from Citibank to Citigroup when they merged about a little over a year before Glass-Steagall was repealed. They went on a lobbying rampage with Congress trying to get this repealed, and they were successful. And what's very interesting is in 2015, the former CEO, John Reed, was interviewed, and he said that was a mistake, that we never should have repealed this, that led to the big crises that we've seen in the past. So Citigroup broke the law, became criminals, and then retroactively got this repealed so that they were no longer criminals. But, you know, we don't need specific laws for every single detail in society, because we are all criminals now. Everybody breaks the law, and you can't help but break the law because it's impossible to know all of the laws. What we need is for them to be prosecuting under something that is obviously immoral and reprehensible. And when you've got a conflict of interest, like investment banking and commercial banking together, it is obviously something where they're committing a fraud. When you think you're depositing your currency in the bank and you think the currency's there, or you think they may have loaned it for somebody that's buying a house or building a house and making a spread on the interest, which is what the banks used to do, but they're actually gambling with it, that is a fraud. The meme of the day. But first, go and get my book. Only 20% of it is a guide to investing in gold and silver. But there's lessons to be learned. The first 20% is monetary history, how it always repeats, and how the expansion of the fiat currency supply is always, after a while, the will of the public and the free market bid up the value of the gold in that country to cover that expansion. So a lot of the things that are in there, the simple economics and stuff, are things that you can use today. Just to be clear, none of this matters if there's a virus. George Washington, presenting the Constitution of the United States. I want to thank you for watching.